I'm going to look at Ich liebe dich by Beethoven from 3 different angles. I want to look at it in terms of harmonic function, counterpoint, in terms of really rhythmic independence of parts, and then I also want to look at it in terms of compound melody, melody that implies multiple melodies inside it. So I'm going to start with the second point, which is the counterpoint, the differences in rhythmic activity in different parts, and focus in on a couple suspensions and retardations that occur here. Focus in with me on these last couple measures of this phrase. It's an A-bar phrase that ends here with a PAC because we've got our tonic up top. And I'm getting into the cadence point. So here's my dominant and here's my tonic. And I want to look at some of the ways in which parts are delayed in their motion. The bass moves right in to the dominant. But look at how some of these notes, like the G, continue over and only resolve later. It's really, I want to focus mainly on that note because it's the chordal 7th. Here we've got A, C sharp, E, G, A7 chord. In A7, the G is the chordal 7th, and chordal 7ths need to resolve down by step. This does resolve down by step, but that motion is delayed. The G is held over, suspended, and then resolved down by step quite a bit later than the bass resolved. So here's the leading tone to D, the chordal 3rd, resolving right away, but there's a delay in this other part. It's an inner part, and that creates a certain amount of conflict. It keeps them separate from one another. Now, I know you're not going to hear that part as prominently as you hear the vocal melody, but still you can hear the tension that comes from hanging on to a note like that. We represent notes that are held over and become dissonant with that, with the bass line, with figures, and figures are just intervals above the bass. So here's a G held over. What is that interval from? What's that notes interval from the D and the bass? Well, it's a 4th, so I'll write a 4 there. There's also a 6th above the bass, so I'll put that in there. That does not belong to a dominant either. It's got to move. So notice how it changes here and becomes a 7th. So the 6th goes to a 7th. The 4th goes down to a 3rd. And that's when the chord really emerges fully. But I'm writing it here to show that that's where the bass changes and sets the stage for the new chord. If I were to write it as a 1-6-4, I would be accurate in labeling it as a verticality. I would see, yeah, I have the notes of the tonic triad. I'm in G. I've got G, I've got a B and a D. But I would also be confusing to a viewer of my analysis in that I would have a 5-6-5, a 5, a chord that should go to the dominant and yet goes to a 1. That's really awkward. How in the world could a 5-6-5 move to a 1-6-4? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense on another level. Here's our predominant 4, and an even more intense predominant 5-6-5, a 5. A predominant should go to the dominant, and you would be going to, if you wrote a 1-6-4 there, it would look like it's going to a tonic. But tonic is representative of something that's stable, that's the point of resolution. This is a point of tension, and you can see that from some of the indications here. The dynamic indications show that this is really the climactic moment. The bass line rises to that point, then falls and finds ultimate resolution there on the G. So this is an intense moment, not a moment of resolution. That's why I'm not going to use 1-6-4 there, but I'm going to write 5 with 6-4-7-3 to show the voice leading. Let's do one more of that sort of thing. Here you get dominant moving to tonic. You expect tonic, so use the bass as your guide, and then show how some of the upper notes take a while to resolve. There are 2 notes that need to resolve in this chord. There's the chordal 7th, D, F sharp, A, and C spell out 5-7 in the key of G. The 7th is the C, D, F sharp, A, C, and that note needs to resolve down by step, but notice how it's sustained here. It's re-articulated and then resolved there to the B. Again, I'm going to show that motion by my figures, which are simply intervals above the bass. G to C, that's a 4th. And that looks familiar. 4-3, that's what we had up here. A 4-3 suspension. We've got another one. That dealt with our resolution, delayed resolution of the chordal 7th. There's another note that needs to resolve, and that's the leading tone. And it's here, the F sharp. It should go to G, and it does, but look at how it's held over first, and then goes up to the G to resolve it. That's a retardation. We had a suspension before, now we've got a retardation. The only difference is how they resolve. The retardation goes up by step. Again, we'll show it with figures. That's a 7th going to an octave, so I'm going to write 7-8. My dissonances, find the resolution, and I have a 1 chord, but notice where I write that one. I write the Roman numeral where the bass note arrives, and then I show how the others are delayed in their motion. It's as if the parts are out of sync, and that has to do with the second point that I mentioned, which was counterpoint, with an emphasis on the independence of motion. Now I'm going to go back and cover more fully the harmonic functions going on underneath. Okay, we've dealt with the cadence. We've got our predominant, our dominant, and our tonic. So I'm really going to focus here on the functions at the beginning of the phrase. The tonic is expanded out across 5 measures. Let's see how it works. I'm asserting that because I can view this dominant chord, which starts out as 5-4-3 and then changes inversion to 6-5. So we've got a 5 chord and 2 different inversions in these measures. And you might say, well, there are these crazy leaps in here. How in the world are you going to view these as embellishing these notes? But you can. It's G, A, F sharp, G. That's double neighbors. This is an incomplete upper neighbor coupled with an incomplete lower neighbor. You put them together and you get a double neighbor pattern. So you could just write DN up here. What we're doing is we're saying that these embellish this 5 chord and its 2 inversions, embellishes the tonic through double neighbor motion in the bass. And we don't care what the other parts do, we're focused on the bass because we named the embellishing chord using the bass motion. There's another way to do it, and that is to write incomplete neighbor here and incomplete neighbor there. In that case, I should probably write the Roman numeral once again. I kind of like the double neighbor thing, but it's just as fine to write incomplete neighbor twice and show these as 2 separate entities, both related by step to tonic triads. This one relates by step over here. So I'm just using a slur to show the connection. This A is related by step back to the G, but not to the next one, the next G. This F sharp is related by step to that G, but not, you can't relate it back. So they're both incomplete neighbors, and together they embellish this tonic that flanks them, the tonic triads that flank them. One more thing to extend it out for 1 extra measure, measure 5. You invert it. You just change the bass from G to B. That's a no-brainer. That's still tonic. So what we're doing is we're saying the tonic, it's like you've got change. You've got some spinning of the wheels. You've got change, but with no net change. You come right back to where you start. That's spinning the wheels kind of activity. The car hasn't gone anywhere. Finally, it moves here when you get some traction and move on to a 4 chord, which is the first of our 2 predominants. It's true that you can view this as a passing chord, that's fine. But you can also view it as a predominant chord because it does lead you to the dominant. In fact, you can write both symbols if you like. You can show that it's a predominant, but it's also passing between two more diatonic things. And in that sense, it's a chromatic embellishment. Again, you name it by the bass motion. This is not incomplete neighboring motion as we had before, but passing motion. So if you want to show it's embellishing quality, go ahead and do it. You can put a symbol up here above that line and show it here as P, passing. Notice that we put the main symbol down below, and we show what the embellishing chords are doing by putting their symbols up above that line. It's a little hard to see here, but that's true in general. If we've got Roman numerals up above, say it does something like that, you show the inverted dominance roll up above. So Roman numerals here, embellishing functions down there, and then the most vital, the most stable entities down here at a lower level. In this case, tonic embellished. Okay, so this we've covered quickly: harmonic function, counterpoint, and I just want to show one more thing, which is compound melody. And then we'll be done. The best illustration I think of that is in the first few bars, because there is motion within chords. So here's a tonic, and the voice moves from one note to another note of that same chord. There's a passing tone in between, but if I can hear a melody as moving between notes of a chord, I have the potential for compound melody. All I have to do now is see whether those are isolated events or if they actually connect to new notes that are, again, separate. And you can. In measure 2, you've got a dominant chord, the leading tone in scale degree 2, the F sharp and the A, all belong to that D chord, D7. And I'm using these stems again to divvy them up, divide them between higher and lower notes. 2 notes per chord. Let's move to this one. Here we have a 5-6-5, and I'm going to stem the highest and the lowest. Notice this pattern: 2 chord tones with a passing tone in each measure. It happens here again. We've got there and there, 2 chord tones, passing motion. Now, if you saw this little clip on the Bach double excerpt, you know that we had a little issue come up where sometimes we were really tempted to mark a couple notes per chord as participating in the bass, and that really does make sense. I think we would have to do that again here, because I can see a voice leading strand coming to end there and a new one picking up here because of this big leap. So I might want to see that this is the highest note, sort of a soprano note for this chord, but then a new one coming in here, so that I'm sort of breaking my little principle, which is try and pick at least one note per chord to belong to each part. But you can see how I can't really stay true to that all the way through, because this becomes an important voice leading strand as well, going up here, D up to E, and carrying on. But I'm just going to set that aside for the moment, fully acknowledge that it's an issue, but now I want to back up and just show the continuity of these voice leading strands within this compound melody. So here we have 3, 4, no, 3, 2, 4, 3, and that works as a melody within a melody. And here's another 1, 7, 2, 1. Those are really working together. I could chart it out more simply up here. So think of this on a treble clef here. 3, 2, 4, 3 as a soprano line. And 1, 7, 2, 1. You notice something interesting about these notes and the relationship to the bass? I'll come back to that thought. For the moment, just notice what I'm doing. I'm taking notes that are separated in time, and I am putting them together as verticalities. I am viewing this melody as moving through notes of the chord. So I'm saying originally, if we thought of this as a chorale, those notes would happen simultaneously, and this melody is created by moving between notes of the chord. So I'm moving from the soprano note to the alto note, and then from the alto note back up. So I'm charting my path through this melody by seeing it as motion through chords from one voice to another. That's what compound melody is all about. Now back to that question, how does this stuff relate to what's in the bass? Well, remember this double neighbor pattern? It happened to go up, down, up. So it's a different contour, but two incomplete neighbors. Notice how this is doing the same kind of thing. As this tonic is stretched out in those first 4 bars, you're getting double neighbor pattern up in the uppermost notes. You're getting it here in our hypothetical alto part as well. So double neighbor motion is just permeating this whole first 4 bars, which makes it kind of interesting. Okay, I'll leave it there. We've covered harmonic function, tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic, in brief, with an emphasis on how it's not just tonic, predominant, and dominant, which are the main ways that we progress harmonically, but it's also about embellishment. Before you leave that tonic, you embellish it. And so for embellishing functions, we'll get things like passing chords and neighbor chords and incomplete neighbor chords, and also cadential 6/4s. Cadential 6/4s are embellishing. So this list will go on quite a while. A pedal chord, we can add to that. But these are the main ones to remember. We have the main functions, then we have embellishing functions, ways to embellish those very functions. Then we talked about counterpoint. Pretty much, I think we kicked off with that, didn't we? So we have suspensions and retardations arising because melodies are independent of each other rhythmically. In those cases, we want to be very clear and simple about our harmonic progression and let the figures do the work of showing how certain parts are creating dissonance against others by delaying their motion, delaying their resolutions. And then with the idea of compound melody, we see melody implying harmony and implying different voices. Here we had a soprano and an alto that we're saying are implicit here, are buried inside this melody, and we can tease them out and show how this melody can be viewed as the result of motion through chords. It's like we're playing them out, we're presenting those chords out in time, and that's this topic of compound melody. All these have to do with teasing apart melody and harmony and seeing how really they're really intermingled. A melody implies harmony, and so a compound melody, even a single melody, if it's a compound melody, clearly presents us with chords. With counterpoint, we see melodies creating things that we could view as harmonic entities, but are better viewed as the result of melodic motion. And with harmonic function, in class, we talked about how those harmonic functions, the tendencies of chords to move to certain other chords, those are really the product of melodic resolutions. So again, if you know what scale degree 7 does, and you know scale degree 7 is either the root or the third of a chord, you know how that chord is going to behave. The melody, the melodic content, is closely related to the harmonic function of a chord. So in all these ways, we see harmony and melody intermingled. Their effects are really, you can't really pull them apart. They work so hand in glove that they're really intertwined with one another, melody and harmony.